صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض، له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير. هو الذي خلقكم فمنكم كافر ومنكم مؤمن، والله بما تعملون بصير. خلق السماوات والأرض بالحق وصوركم فأحسن صوركم وإليه المصير. يعلم ما في السماوات والأرض ويعلم ما تسرون وما تعلنون، والله عليم بذات الصدور. ألم يأتكم نبأ الذين كفروا من قبل فذاقوا وبال أمرهم ولهم عذاب عليم. ذلك بأنه كانت تأتيهم رسلهم بالبينات فقالوا أبشر يهدوننا فكفروا وتولوا واستغنى الله والله غني حميد. زعم الذين كفروا أن لن يبعثوا قل بلى وربي لتبعثن ثم لتنبؤن بما علمتم وذلك على الله يسير. فآمنوا بالله ورسوله والنور الذي أنزلنا والله بما تعملون خبير. يوم يجمعكم ليوم الجمع ذلك يوم التغابن. ومن يؤمن بالله ويعمل صالحا يكفر عنه سيئاته ويدخله جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا، ذلك الفوز العظيم. والذين كفروا وكذبوا بآياتنا أولئك أصحاب النار خالدين فيها وبئس المصير. ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله، ومن يؤمن بالله يهدي قلبه، والله بكل شيء عليم. وأطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول فإن توليتم فإنما على رسولنا البلاغ المبين. الله لا إله إلا هو وعلى الله فليتوكل المؤمنون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم عدوا لكم فاحذروهم، وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم. إن إنما أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة والله عنده أجر عظيم فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم واسمعوا وأطيعوا وأنفقوا خير لأنفسكم ومن يوق شح نفسه فأولئك هم المفلحون إن تقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا يضاعفه لكم ويغفر لكم والله شكور حليم عالم الغيب والشهادة العزيز الحكيم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلى
सलवात भर देगा सलवात वादा हुआ वफा एक सर ने दी सदा शीरी में आ गया वादा हुआ वफा एक सर ने दी सदा शीरी में आ गया घर मेरा लुट गया घर मेरा लुट गया ज़ैनब है बेरिदा शीरी में आ गया पैरों से मेरी बहनों के कांटे निकाल ले वो देख गिर रही है सकीना संभाल लेकर तुम्हारे घर प्यासों का काफिला शीरी में आ गया मारे है संग शहर के लोगों ने इस कदर बहनों के साथ साथ है ज़ख्मी मेरा भी सर पहचान अब ज़रा चेहरा लहू भरा शीरी में आ गया कुछ देर के लिए है तेरे घर में बस कयाम जल्दी से घर करीब की मजलिस का एहतमाम आई है फातिमा फर्शे अज़ा बिछा शीरी में आ गया रुखसत के दिन रिदाए दी थिन है किस लिए सर नंगे मेरे कुल्बे की लत से जान ले। अब वक्त आ गया, ला चादरे वोला, शीरी में आ गया। वो कह रही थी भाई मुझे शर्म आएगी, शीरी को बिन्ते फातिमा क्या मुँह दिखाएगी। ज़ैनब है बेरिदा, घर के दिए बुझा, शीरी में आ गया। वादा हुआ वफा, एक सर ने दी सदा, शीरी में आ गया। सलवात। बांट देगा सलवात। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। जब शामो सहर फातिमा ज़हरा तुझे रोए। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। दुर्रा लिए पहरे पे सितमगार खड़ा है। दुर्रा लिए पहरे पे सितमगार खड़ा है। कैसे तेरे लाशे पे सकीना तुझे रोए। कैसे तेरे लाशे पे सकीना तुझे रोए। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। जिस वक्त उठाया ना गया लाशा जवा का, जिस वक्त उठाया ना गया लाशा जवा का, शे उस घरी अकबर से ज़्यादा तुझे रोए। शे उस घरी अकबर से ज़्यादा तुझे रोए। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। ज़ैनब ने कहा शाम में गरीबा में है गाजी। ज़ैनब ने कहा शाम में गरीबा में है गाजी, बेपर्दा मुझे देख के बाबा तुझे रोए, बेपर्दा मुझे देख के बाबा तुझे रोए। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। सजदे के लिए जब लिया हाथों का सहारा, सजदे के लिए जब लिया हाथों का सहारा, तो सज्जाद मुसल्ले पे हमेशा तुझे रोए, तो सज्जाद मुसल्ले पे हमेशा तुझे रोए। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। बिन हाथ के किस तरह तू घोड़े से गिरा था, बिन हाथ के किस तरह तू घोड़े से घिरा था। ये सुन के बहुत आले मदीना तुझे रोए। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। दुर्रा लिए पहरे पे सितमगार खड़ा है, दुर्रा लिए पहरे पे सितमगार खड़ा है। कैसे तेरे लाशे पे सकीना तुझे रोए, कैसे तेरे लाशे पे सकीना तुझे रोए। अब्बास तेरा हक है, ज़माना तुझे रोए। सलवात।
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can we please start Surah Fatiha for the names displayed on the screens and for all marhumin, please. Surah al-Mubarakat al-Fatiha. Brothers and sisters, just one announcement. Just join us as we retrace and learn from the footsteps of Bibi Zainab alayhi salam from Medina to Sham and experience the Arba'in walk closer to home. The journey will end with a heart-wrenching play on the battle of Hazrat al-Akbar alayhi salam. So this walk will take place here at Pioneer Place on Saturday the 19th and Sunday the 20th of August. Children under 16 must be accompanied by an adult. The attendance is free, however registration is mandatory. So please have a look at the WhatsApp messages and sign up if you can, inshallah. Thank you for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الأول قبل الإنشاء والإحياء والآخر بعد فناء الأشياء العليم الذي لا ينسى من ذكره ولا ينقص من شكره ولا يخيب من دعاه ولا يقطع رجاء من رجاه ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد صلى الله عليه وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولنبلونكم حتى نعلم المجاهدين منكم والصابرين. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بأبي عبد الله الحسين عليه السلام. We begin by offering our condolences to the Imam of our time for all the tragedies that took place on the day of Ashura and what followed after that. I'd like to take you back to the month of Dhul Hijjah, when Imam Hussain alayhi salam is in Mecca. He has just left Medina and he has found out that in Mecca Yazid's forces are going to try and assassinate him near the Kaaba. And so he decides to leave Mecca using these words, where he says, Rida Allahi ridana Ahlul Bayt. We, the Ahlul Bayt, are pleased with the pleasure of Allah. Nasbiru ala balaihi wa yuwaffiyana ujura sabirin. We remain steadfast through his trials so that he may reward us the reward of the sabirin, the patient ones, the persevering ones. These are the days when we are commemorating the tribulations that befell Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and Bibi Zainab alayhi salam and the rest of the family of Imam Hussain. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. They have just witnessed the brutal mutilation of the bodies of their menfolk. They have just witnessed the torment and the harassment of the looting of all their possessions, their tents being set on fire. And now they have been mounted on saddleless camels on the way to Kufa and then on the way to Sham. All of this, and then on top of that, they will be paraded amongst the people, whilst the heads of their beloved ones are put on spears accompanying them on the journey. But throughout these tribulations, throughout these difficult times, we see them manifesting these words of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And they are exercising sabr throughout. No matter what happens, they are going to try and continue the mission of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. No matter what tribulation falls their way, they are going to try and overcome the difficulties in order to spread the message of Imam Hussain. But this begs a question for ourselves. That year in, year out, we come and we commemorate and we lament over all the tragedies that took place. We hear about the intensity of the suffering. We hear about all the perseverance that the Ahlul Bayt showed through these difficulties. And yes, it is very important that we do mourn and lament over the tragedies. But these days are also important for us to take a lesson from what has happened. And we should be asking ourselves that how is it that the likes of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, the likes of Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, were able to go through what they went through? What was it that they managed to achieve that I can try and also put in place in my own life, such that I can also be along the same footsteps as Bibi Zainab alayhi salam? And so today, what we briefly want to explore, time allowing, is the following. What is the station of the sabirin? Why is it that Imam Hussain, at the end of his statement, he's saying, we want to be rewarded, the rewarded of the sabirin. Imam Hussain, somebody who is at that high station already, he is talking about wanting the reward of the sabirin. Number two, what is the true meaning of sabr? If I want to be amongst the sabirin, then I have to understand what sabr actually means so that I can implement it in my life. And the third thing, inshallah, will be how do I now, after understanding the station of these people and what sabr means, how do I now implement it in my own life? Please recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we read the Quran, we see that different groups of people are mentioned with titles, and usually we see this at the end of the verses. So for example, we've come across the words like salihin, the righteous ones. We've come across the muhsinin, those who do good. We've come across the muttaqin, those who have taqwa. And usually what we find is that the word that's being used to describe these people is a very wholesome word. It's a quality that is being described by Allah that covers a lot of different attributes, such that if this quality is in place, then everything else will fall into place. So if you think about it, somebody who has taqwa, having taqwa in every aspect of my life will ensure that everything is in place as far as my purpose in this world is concerned and my journey to the hereafter is concerned. The same for being righteous, doing good. Because they are these general keys that are given to us, that if these are in place, then everything else will naturally fall into place. One of the titles that we see being mentioned in the Quran is that of the sabirin, indicating to us that by having sabr, it's one of those keys that if it is in place, then everything else will naturally fall into place. So what we want to start off with is just explore from the Quran and Hadith that what is the station of these sabirin? Why are they being singled out in the Quran? And what is it that they are achieving through their sabr? If we look at the famous verse that you have probably come across before in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says to us, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. We will surely test you with a measure, with a small amount of fear and hunger, and a loss of wealth, lives, and produce, and give good news to the sabirin. So this tells us that the sabr that these people are exercising is in respect to these few things. This idea of losing something, this idea of difficulty and trial. But then the verse goes on to explain who these sabirin are. الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. They are the ones who, when an affliction befalls them, they say, إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. We belong to Allah and to Him we are returning. Now, we tend to do the same. When we hear the announcement of somebody passing away, somebody who might have been close to us, part of our community, the first words we say is, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. But when it comes to the sabirin, it's not just a mechanical thing. It's not just a case of when I hear it, I should say it. No, for these people, it is something that's coming from their hearts. When affliction falls, when it befalls them, their natural state is that they remember that they are from Allah and they are returning to Allah. And it's not just death, any affliction that befalls them. But then Allah tells us what they achieve. What is for the sabirin? أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ. It is they who receive the blessings of the Lord, of their Lord, and His mercy. And it is they who are the rightly guided ones. Now, if we look at this idea of the sabirin deserving the mercy of Allah, again a question comes to mind, that are we not all recipients of the mercy of Allah? What is mercy? When we look at the tafsir of mercy, usually it's slightly different to how we may have perceived it before. Typically, when I think of mercy, having mercy on somebody, I think of walking outside and seeing somebody who doesn't have much clothing, doesn't have much food to eat, hasn't got a shelter, and I feel pity in my heart, and I feel a bit of sympathy for him, and so I reach out into my pocket and I give something to that person, and I have been merciful on that person. But that doesn't really tie in with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah doesn't have feelings. He doesn't undergo change as a result of what He might see. And what that tells us is that our definition of mercy needs to change slightly. Mercy, when I am having mercy on somebody and Allah having mercy on somebody, it's the same thing, but in my realm, there are some prerequisites. For me to have mercy on somebody, I need the feelings. For me to give somebody what they need, I need to feel that sympathy. Those are the prerequisites for me. But the definition of mercy is the act that Allah also takes part in. And that is the act of giving to the one who needs. Why do I say giving to the one who needs? Is not every act of giving a mercy? Well, picture it for yourselves. If you were to walk outside just now and you saw that person who didn't have much clothing, didn't have much food, he is in need of something, I give it to him, I'm merciful on him. But if I see somebody driving down in their Lamborghini, heading off to their holiday home and the yacht that's waiting for them, and I give them the same £5 that I gave to that person, that's not having mercy on them. In fact, he may turn around and throw it back. So that tells us that the act of mercy is giving to the one who needs. Now the sabirin have been singled out. The sabirin are those who deserve Allah's mercy. They deserve to be given what they need. However, when we start reciting the Quran, when we start any task of ours, we see that there are two types of mercy for Allah. We say Bismillahir Rahman Ar-Rahim. There are two types of mercy. There is the mercy of His Rahmaniyya, there is the mercy of His Rahimiyya. What is the mercy of His Rahmaniyya? It is that mercy that is given to all. It's the mercy of the oxygen to breathe, the water to drink, the shelter that's provided. All of these things that are available, whether you believe in Him or you don't believe in Him, that is the mercy that is given to us. And that is the mercy of His Rahmaniyya. So then what is the mercy of His Rahimiyya? If we look through the proofs of the Quran as well as the Hadith, we see this is a special mercy now. This is a mercy that is given to those who now accept Allah, who believe in Allah, who obey what Allah is saying. How do we reach the mercy of His Rahimiyya? We only reach His Rahimiyya by using the blessings of His Rahmaniyya in the correct way. In all of these things that we have been given, that is available for everyone, if I use it in the way of Allah, it will open the doors for His Rahimiyya. Now if we go back to the verse where it says that these sabirin have now been singled out for the mercy of Allah, we understand that it's not the first type. It's the special mercy of Allah. They have been singled out for this special mercy of Allah, which would constitute things like the knowledge that we go after, the tawfiq of doing good deeds, the guidance that we are trying to go after in this world in order to reach our purpose in life. So the first thing that we see the sabirin are being singled out for is for this special mercy of Allah. What else are they being given as a result of their sabr? We see another verse of the Quran which says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا. And we appointed from them imams who guided by our command when they had been persevering, when they had exercised their sabr. In other words, the second thing that is being singled out for them is this idea of a position of leadership. The position of leadership is being given to the sabirin because of the sabr that they have manifested. And who in the Quran is the most best example of exercising patience such that he now becomes an imam? Any ideas? Prophet Ibrahim. Ahsant. When we see the life of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, we see he has gone through different stages. He starts off by being that youth who is against idol worship, and everybody in the town knows it. But still, he knows that he has a task to perform. No matter what the consequences are, he has to break the idols. Even though he's going to be thrown into that fire of Namrud, he goes and does it. Then the next test comes, where he has to now leave and go to Mecca and leave his family there in a barren desert with tawakkul ala Allah that the family will be saved. And then finally we see at the end of his life, this son that he has been waiting for at the end, at such a old age, he's been granted this son Ismail. He's being told to sacrifice Ismail. It's only when he goes through there, we see that he is now being appointed as an imam. So the hadith tells us, اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ عَبْدًا قَبْلَ أَنْ يَتَّخِذَهُ نَبِيًّا. Allah took Ibrahim as a slave before He took him as a prophet. وَنَبِيًّا قَبْلَ أَنْ يَتَّخِذَهُ رَسُولًا. And as a prophet before He took him as a messenger. وَرَسُولًا قَبْلَ أَنْ يَتَّخِذَهُ خَلِيلًا. And a messenger before He took him as a close friend. وَخَلِيلًا قَبْلَ أَنْ يَجْعَلَهُ إِمَامًا. And He took him as a close friend before He appointed him as an imam. فَلَمَّا جَمَعَ لَهُ هَذِهِ الْأَشْيَاء قَالَ إِنِّي جَاعِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا. When all these characteristics had been gathered in him, He told him, now I am appointing you as an imam, as a position of leadership for mankind, because of the sabr that he has exercised. So they have been singled out for their mercy. They have been singled out for their positions of leadership. The last thing that we will mention here is that they have been singled out for the ma'iyya of Allah, the idea of being with Allah. Now once again, just like the mercy of Allah, we saw there were two types. There is the general mercy which is for everyone. There is the specific mercy for the chosen ones. This idea of being with Allah is also of two types. And that's why you see, for example, هُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. He is with you wherever you may be. That's the general idea of being with Allah. Allah is not separate to any one of us. When we look at the tafsir of Surah Al-Ikhlas, when we see لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ, one of the interpretations is that That it's not just about Allah didn't give birth and He wasn't given birth to. What does it mean? The idea of giving birth means that there's now a separation between the baby and the mother. They were together. One of the interpretations of lam yalid wa lam yulad is that Allah, by creating us, He's not separating from us the way the baby does from a mother. But that's the general ma'iyah. That's the general idea of being with Allah. What we see though is that there is a special type of being with Allah. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah. O those who have believed, seek help through patience and prayer. Why? Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. Surely Allah is with the patient ones. So these are the three things. The idea of mercy, special mercy being attributed to them, positions of leadership, and the idea of being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to top it all up, we have a hadith from Imam Sajjad alayhi salam himself. If you could recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He says to us, "As-sabru min al-iman bi manzilati ar-ra's min al-jasad." The position of patience or sabr with respect to faith, iman, is like that of the head with respect to the rest of the body. وَلَا إِيمَانَ لِمَنْ لَا صَبْرَ لَهُ. And there is no faith for the one who doesn't have patience. So you can see the high status of sabr. So that brings us to our second question now, that what does it mean to do sabr? Now if we were to think about it, and this is where if we just go into the translation, maybe we have a different concept in our mind. Because when we think of sabr, we think of it as this idea of a passive waiting, tolerating something, just waiting for something to pass. Similar to our understanding of intidhar. When we say we're doing intidhar of our imam, what's the first thing that comes to our mind? If you look at the translation, it will say, we are waiting for the imam. And we think of ourselves, if we are students, then we might think of ourselves in that detention room waiting for that clock to tick so that I can now finally be left out. If we have been to the doctors, then I'm sitting there in that waiting room being patient for my name to be called. If we're using the underground, we're waiting for that, delay to be sorted out, and I'm waiting, I'm being patient. That's one understanding of sabr. However, there is a more active meaning of sabr. And we see this through the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. The Holy Prophet tells us, as-sabru thalatha. Sabrun inda al-musibah, wa sabrun ala al-ta'a, وَصَبْرٌ عَنِ الْمَعْصِيَةِ. Sabr of three types. There is a sabr that we exercise during tribulations. And this is probably the one that we are most accustomed to. The ones that we saw the examples of. But then we have a sabr that is upon his obedience. And we have a third sabr which is a sabr away from his disobedience. And so this tells us that this idea of sabr isn't just an idea of waiting. No, it's this idea of persevering. When we say sabr on his ta'ah, meaning that sometimes we are going to see things that we don't want to do. Allah has called us to do something for His sake. But it's hard for us. Waking up for Fajr in the summer, the early hours of the morning, fasting those long fasts, they're not easy. That requires perseverance. It requires this motivation of keeping on going and not letting go. When we talk about as-sabr an al-ma'siyah, it's very easy for our eyes to look at that thing that I wasn't supposed to look at. It takes effort, it takes perseverance for me to say, look, for the sake of Allah, I'm not going to look that way. For the sake of Allah, I'm not going to shake that hand. For the sake of Allah, I'm not going to go to that place. And so what we see is that sabr is not just an idea of going through the tribulation and not complaining. That is one aspect of it. But there's a much more active aspect of it, which is to do with obeying what Allah wants us to do and staying away from what Allah wants us to stay away from. What else shows us that this is the actual meaning of sabr? A verse of the Quran shows how, when it comes to the idea of fighting against the enemy, Allah is using the word sabr over here. Ya ayyuhan nabi harrid al-mu'minina ala al-qital. Oh, the Prophet, urge the faithful ones to fight. And then the verse continues, if there are 20 who have sabr from amongst you, they shall overcome 200. And if there are 100, then they will overcome 1,000. If sabr was just this idea of waiting and not complaining through tribulations, then it wouldn't have been used in this context. So it shows us the idea of persevering. There's a story from the time of the Bani Israel. It comes towards the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, where the people are tested through different ways. Again, showing this idea of what sabr actually is. If you remember the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, when he comes to the people, to the Bani Israel, and finally after so much struggle, he frees them from the shackles of Fir'aun. They manage to cross the Red Sea and they reach the other side, and the rest of them are drowned. Now what happens after that? That we're not so familiar with. After having escaped Fir'aun, now suddenly they start getting a very good place to live in, and their standard of living increases, and they become a strong people. But as with anything, along with that comes another trap of shaitan, where they start becoming proud of themselves. They start disobeying Allah. It happens to us too, right? We score that first goal, and then you feel like you've won the match. Even at 90 minutes these days, it doesn't help, right? You have to go to 101. And that's when you realize when you've won or not. So the same thing happened here. They started becoming proud. They started disobeying Allah. As a result of their disobedience, they became a very weak people. A people came in and expelled them from their homes, and they became a very weak people. A few years later, when they had enough, they approached the prophet of their time, whose name was Prophet Samuel. And they said to him, why don't you ask Allah to give us a king who is going to help us get victory against those people who kicked us out, and so we can establish ourselves once more. The prophet knows them and says, what if Allah did appoint a king for you and you decided not to fight alongside him? And they're shocked. Why would we not fight alongside him when we have been expelled, our children have been killed? So the prophet says, okay, I will pray to Allah. The prophet prays to Allah, and Allah commands him to appoint Talut as the king of Bani Israel at that time. Now, who is Talut? Talut is not somebody from the very rich people of that town, of that people. And so the people start complaining. They say, look, we are more deserving of being in this position. He doesn't even have any wealth. And so the first test is there. They prayed to Allah for a king, but a huge group of people failed the first test. They didn't persevere. And they didn't take Talut as their king. Those who were accepting of Talut, they now go on a journey because they have to go and face these people and fight against them. And this journey is a very long and tiring journey. They reach a place where there is some water to drink, and Talut commands them not to drink. Obviously, this is a command of Allah. He's saying, do not drink from this water. Even though you may be tired, but do not drink from this water. If you drink from it, you are not of me anymore. A huge chunk of those people now drank the water. They couldn't persevere any further. And so the group who are actually with Talut becomes smaller. That small group now goes to the final test. They reach the people only to find Jalut on the other side. Goliath is waiting to fight against them. Out of the few who are left with Talut, a lot of them also disappear and say that we can't face this huge giant. We're not going to be able to fight him. What do the people who stay with Talut say to them? They say, كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله والله مع الصابرين. How many a small group has overcome a larger group by Allah's will, and Allah is with the persevering ones. So once again we see that the active nature of sabr is being talked about here. So the final question, and maybe the most important one. How is it that I can try and ensure that sabr is something that I exercise in my own life? The first point of implementation may not be something that we feel is so practical, because it's an implementation of the mind. It's an understanding. When we see these verses that tell us, like the one I recited right at the beginning, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ حَتَّى نَعْلَمَ الْمُجَاهِدِينَ مِنْكُمْ وَالصَّابِرِينَ. We will surely test you until we ascertain which of you are from the mujahideen and the sabirin. That tells us that this life is not going to be a life of comfort. We are here temporarily, we are heading somewhere. This life is just a journey. And on this journey, Allah is telling us that certain things are going to happen in order for you to make that destination. You're not going to be able to reach the goal until you go through some growth. That growth is going to come through these tribulations. So the first thing that we need to keep in mind is, obviously we don't go after difficulties, but at the same time, we shouldn't have this expectation that when I go through the standard life that I'm going to go through, it's going to be all rosy. I'm going to go through my education, get a nice job, get a house, get a car, and live that standard life. What we see on social media are just excerpts of the peak of people's lives. That doesn't mean the whole life is like that. The majority of the life is not like that. And so the first implementation is an implementation of the mind, accepting the fact that this life is going to require some effort, some sabr and perseverance from me. The second application is a more personal one. As an individual, I am going to have to persevere in different things. We see that there is a trend right now that people are after instant gratification. I will only enter this project if I can see the fruits of it within 6 months. Otherwise, I'm not interested. And if we went down that route, then none of the trees would have been planted, because the majority of the trees bear their fruits after maybe even the lifetime of the planter. So the second thing is to bear in mind that this life, it's not going to be comfortable, but it requires time in certain things. It's not a case that I get a job and suddenly 2 months later I should be expecting my promotion. Even in our day-to-day things, certain things take time. But where it's really important is this idea of knowledge and learning. Certain things require time and effort, and knowledge is one of them. And what we see is that now we have this version of TikTok Islam, where we are tempted to just understand something very complicated, but I'll say to you, no, explain it to me in 2 minutes. I don't have more than 2 minutes. Explain to me exactly why I have to pray qasr namaz in this situation and not in that situation in 2 minutes. That's all I have. Well, there's principles, there's all these layers of ahkam, there's all these hadith that people have gone through. There's a meticulous study that has taken place in order to reach these things. Some of these things are not possible to explain in 2 minutes. The other trap we fall into is within the field of spirituality. In spirituality, again, we pray namaz al-shab in the morning and we think, now when I wake up, I should be seeing the angels. Forget the walk from Najaf to Karbala. I can teleport myself there. That's how we feel when we've done something. We have this idea of something happening instantaneously to ourselves. Again, what we see from the lives of the ulama is that no, these things come with time. There are ulama who have testified to the fact that for 50 years, they did exactly as Allah wanted them to, but they didn't have any of these tangible things that we are after. What they were after in terms of spirituality was to make sure that they are following what Allah wants them to. At every stage, they were just following what Allah wanted them to. And it wasn't these karamat and these other things that maybe we have in mind that they were after. There's a story, and I'll end with this, inshallah, of a man called Hashim al-Haddad. He was a student of Ayatollah Qadi who started studying under his supervision, but he wasn't very well off. He was very poor, and after he got married, his mother-in-law was always on his case, always saying to him, taunting him about the standard of living that he has and that her daughter had to go through. And he reached a stage where it was getting too much for him. So he goes to his teacher and he asks him, can I divorce my wife? And the teacher asks him at Al-Qadi that, do you have a problem with your wife? He says, no, there's nothing wrong with her, but the mother-in-law the taunts us so much, I can't bear it anymore. He said, don't worry. You stick with it, persevere, your mother-in-law will be the cause of your tarbiyah. One day, a hot summer day, he goes home. He's really tired, he's hungry, and he's thirsty. He opens the door and he sees the mother-in-law is sitting there. The taunts start. He doesn't have the capacity for this. He decides to just go onto the roof. But then she starts talking louder and taunting him. Even the neighbors can hear. He wants to retaliate, but he remembers the words of his teacher. And so he comes down again and he just leaves. He leaves the house. He says, I was just wandering aimlessly in the streets, and suddenly the doors of the realm, of a higher realm, opened for me as a result of this perseverance for the taunts of his mother-in-law. So inshallah, a lesson for us all. If we're having trouble with our mothers-in-law, then maybe they're the cause of our tarbiyah. As a summary, we talked about how the sabirin have a very high station. They've been singled out for the mercy of Allah. They've been singled out for positions of leadership and for the ma'iyah, being with Allah. We look through the true meaning of sabr, that it's not something passive, rather it is something active, meaning persevering. And we talked about the application, how sometimes I have to apply it in my mind to understand that life is not a bed of roses. There are going to be tribulations. There are personal applications that I have to go through as well. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifinaik. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. When we look back into the history of the holy personalities, what we find is that the bonds between them were very strong. And one of the relationships that is shown in history of a strong bond is that of a brother and a sister. We see it, for example, in the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, where it is his sister that goes after the basket and is the means for him coming back to his mother. We see it in the time of Imam Rida alayhi salam, where after Imam Kadhim alayhi salam is taken into the prisons, it is he who looks after Sayyidah Ma'asuma alayhi salam until he also is summoned by Ma'mun and he writes a letter to her. Immediately upon receiving that letter, she embarks on a journey towards him, which then leads to her own martyrdom. But perhaps the strongest of bonds is seen between Zainab and Hussain. Zainab is a partner to her brother throughout the revolution, from the beginning of the journey right to the end. She is aiding him, trusting in him, and she is known as Ummul Masa'ib. Maybe because she witnessed the demise of her grandfather Rasulullah, the assassination of her father Amir al-Mu'mineen, the persecution of her mother Fatima, and the poisoning of her brother Hassan. But in all those tragedies, she had Hussain with her. Hussain was always there to console her and comfort her, but now she is all alone. Who is she going to share this grief with? Who is she going to help her carry this pain all the way to Kufa and then on towards Sham? After Hussain, Zainab alayha salam now takes charge of the caravan. She is the one looking after the Imam of the time, consoling the ladies and comforting the children. But who is there to console Zainab? On the night of Ashura, Hussain would be speaking to her saying, "Oh Zainab, have patience. Oh my sister, hardships will come your way. Be patient." But the caravan is taken to Kufa and the ladies and children are paraded in front of the people. If anyone other than Zainab alayhi salam would have been there, they would have lost all heart and given up in the pain and the torture. But this was Zainab bint Ali. She stands firm amongst the Kufans and speaks to them. A narrator expresses, "I had never seen a modest lady more eloquent than her. It was as if she spoke with the tongue of Amir al-Mu'mineen. أتبكون إي والله فابكوا كثيرا وضحكوا قليلا فلقد فزتم بعارها وشرارها ولن تغسلوا دنسها عنكم أبدا." Do you weep? Yes, by Allah, you should weep and laugh a little, for you have earned dishonor and disgrace, and you will never be able to wash off its stain. O Zainab, we will not forget your sacrifice, but this was your pathway to paradise. For Hussain, you gave everything you could. For this cause, by his side, you firmly stood. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم حسين.
لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين I will beseech you, I will grieve you into the night. I will beseech you, I will grieve you into the night. You are my master, I am alone, I call unto you. You are my master, I am alone, I call unto you, because I will be with you till the end, Hussein. In my eyes there's always tears of pain, like a river flows for your love, Hussein. Every broken heart cries out your name, cries out your name. روحي وقلبي لديك صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله. روحي وقلبي لديك صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله. From your shrine I can't bear to stay apart. The flame of your love ignites my heart. Your name gives meaning to my soul. To you I raise my hands and call. From your shrine I can't bear to stay apart. The flame of your love ignites my heart. Your name gives meaning to my soul. To you I raise my hands and call. Mere Mola Ya Hussain Jan, Mere Mola Ya Hussain Jan, Hussain Janam, Hussain Janam. My tears for you will never dry. Mere Mola Ya Hussain Jan, Mere Mola Ya Hussain Jan, Hussain Janam, Hussain Janam. My tears for you will never dry. For every step I take is to you, Hussain. Till my final breath, your love will remain. Even if they take my feet and my hands, I'll come crawling to your holy land. To your holy land. روحي وقلبي لديك صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله. روحي وقلبي لديك صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله. لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين. بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات.